If the Dolphins decide to pursue a highly productive veteran running back, which would make the most sense for the Dolphins and be the best opportunity? Tennessee's Derrick Henry or Minnesota's Dalvin Cook?
You are Locked On Dolphins, your daily Miami Dolphins podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
All right, Miami. Welcome to another episode of Locked On Dolphins. It's your team every day here on the Locked On Network. I'm your host, Kyle Krabs, lifelong Miami Dolphins fan, co-host of the Locked On NFL Scouting Podcast with Joe Marino, podcast dedicated to team building across the entirety of the NFL. Your host here on Locked On Dolphins. I want to thank you guys for making Locked On Dolphins your first Miami Dolphins listen of the day. Today is Thursday, April 20th, 2023. And I want to give a special shout out to the everydayers who check us out on YouTube or wherever you find your favorite podcasts and make Locked On Dolphins a staple of your daily routine. See you guys. I hear you guys. Love all you guys. But if you're not a part of the Everydayers Club, think twice because we got great content like what we're talking about here today, which is the discussion around Derrick Henry and Dalvin Cook. Two veteran running backs who have been highly productive stars in the NFL for the better part of the past half decade in the NFL. These are two running backs who are getting close to that magical age of 30 that kind of gets scary, especially when you're going to pay players a high amount of dollars to play for your squad when you are shouldering a significant workload year over year over year over year, which both of these players have done. But the question is, if the Dolphins were to make a move, and I'm going to call the timeout, okay? You can hear me calling timeout. You can see me calling timeout. This conversation does not absolve the Dolphins from the need to address the offensive line, okay? I'm going to get it out of the way right out of the jump because there's going to be people who read the topic and the headline of today's show and they're going to be like, oh, running back, it doesn't matter until they get the offensive line fixed. Like, I don't disagree with you. I fully, wholeheartedly agree. The Dolphins need to be better at two spots on their offensive line, right tackle and left guard. Nobody's denying that. But in the event that these maneuvers or this hypothetical maneuver can exist in the same world in which that gets accomplished, which would you rather have? There's some financials at play here. There's skill set in play here. There's long-term viability that's in play here. There's salary cap ramifications that are in play here. There's a lot of layers to this, so I checked the tape on both players. I went back and watched the majority of their best games from the past season, 2022. So Dalvin Cook and Derrick Henry, what they each did in 2022 with their best performances of the year, to see how much we can still go. Right, and obviously Dalvin Cook right now is pretty hot as a name for the Dolphins. He played his college ball at Florida State. He's from the area. Well, the let him cook memes and the YouTube comments on the Dolphins press conferences, go get Cook, go trade for Dalvin Cook. Well, I think that's where things really do get interesting because the pathway to acquiring these players, I think, is different. The first thing you have to acknowledge is the contracts for these players where they are currently at. Derrick Henry's going to turn 30 years old this season. Dalvin Cook's going to turn 28 years old this season. So Derrick Henry's about a year and a half older than Dalvin Cook. Derrick Henry is currently in the last year of his contract and scheduled to make $10.5 million in cash this season. If the Dolphins were to acquire him, they would owe him $10.5 million in cash. Meanwhile, Dalvin Cook has 3 years remaining on his contract. And while that might seem like a good thing, I'm not necessarily sure that it is because the cash is ascending dramatically starting now. He's owed $11 million. He's owed more cash this year than Derrick Henry. Then in 2024, when he's 29 years old, he's going to be owed $12.5 million in cash. And then in 2025, when he's 30 years old, he's going to be owed $13.5 million in cash. So that's a 3-year, and blessed, I'm going to do the math here live on the show. 3 years, 35, 36, $37 million. $12.33 million per season over the next 3 years. I think that changes the conversation a little bit. Because for Derrick Henry, you could say, well, we know it's a 1-year rental. If we want to extend him after that, we'll have him in-house. We'll have right of first refusal, or we'll have exclusive negotiating rights over the course of the first 3 months of the calendar year in 2024. That's a good thing. Meanwhile, with Dalvin Cook, are you going to ask Dalvin Cook to take a pay cut? Are you going to trade something for Dalvin Cook? And then be like, hey, we know you're due for 37 over the next 3 years, but none of it's guaranteed. So we just traded for you, but we might have to cut you or move on unless you're willing to take a pay cut to stay here. Or are you going to restructure this contract and make it a bunch of prorated dollars from a signing bonus? Say you convert $10 million into a signing bonus this year, and then you spread the salary cap out over the next 3 seasons. Okay, you solved the year one problem, but you've now set yourself up for, if you were to treat him like a 1-year rental, you now have over $6.5 million in dead cap for what you paid him this year. I think the length of the contract and the fact that the cash is ascending and you'd be asking a player to take a pay cut does not help the negotiation for the trade value of Dalvin Cook in this situation, which is pretty interesting because usually you want players who have multiple years on their deal that you can play the fun money with, but it's because of the position, the aging of the position, and the surplus of available talent at the position, right? Everybody's asking, why haven't the Dolphins gone out and got these offensive linemen? Well, they're pretty darn scarce. Every NFL team's trying to get 8 offensive linemen with individual skill sets. There's not enough to go around. There's not 252 starting caliber offensive linemen in the NFL. There's just not. Meanwhile, running backs, if there's 32, there's more than 32 starting caliber backs. It's the surplus that makes these players more often acquirable and able to be moved. Now, there's a whole different conversation beyond the economics where I think Derrick Henry probably would command more in a trade because of his contract situation, and he has been a better player. They've both been phenomenal NFL talents. But I think Derrick Henry on the 1-year rental versus the challenges that are there with a 3-year, $37 million contract for Dalvin Cook is what is remaining on that deal. I think those roadblocks actually hurt Dalvin Cook's trade value where you could probably get him for cheaper than Derrick Henry. Would you rather have Dalvin Cook, especially in this Dolphin system, than Derrick Henry? That's the next question that we're going to explore here on Locked On Dolphins. Something exciting is coming to Built.com on April 22nd. I don't have all the details. I've heard a bunch of rumblings, some whispers about some pretty exciting developments over at Built. But the excitement is real, and it's something you don't want to miss. If you don't know how Built works, they have the most incredible protein bars. They taste like candy bars on the entire planet. And they do these amazing flavor drops with unreal flavors with limited quantities. Coming your way, April 22nd. So mark your calendars and head to Built.com on Saturday, April 22nd to see the newest drop and discover what all the hype is about. I can't wait to see this flavor is for myself. The whole Locked On channel, the NFL channel, has a bunch of conspiracy theories about the flavor that it's going to be, and somebody's probably going to be right. I hope it's me. Make sure to use promo code LOCKEDON15 and you'll get 15% off your order at Built.com. One thing that I did do, and I quite enjoyed doing this. I mentioned when we've done the Prospect Spotlight series over the course of the past couple of weeks now, we did running backs, and we did a whole block of running backs. We did 10, 11 running backs. I also did Raheem Mostert and Jeff Wilson. Well, now I've put Dalvin Cook and Derrick Henry into the same grading scale of grading traits within the system. And these are 2 definitive upgrades. I think needless to say. They're very different stylistic players, right? If you were to put Raheem Mostert in one bucket and Jeff Wilson in the other bucket, Dalvin Cook is more of the Raheem Mostert type back, but I think he's a little bit more well-rounded as a player. And Derrick Henry is very much the Jeff Wilson type of physical runner, inside zone between the tackles, but he's also scheme diverse enough to be able to run outside zone and get the corner and create big plays up the sideline. On a 100-point scale, Raheem Mostert and Jeff Wilson grade out as an 83.3 and a 78.8 in my assessment as NFL players in this system and their fit and skill levels within this Dolphins offensive system. Derrick Henry and Dalvin Cook scored as a 90.7 and an 89.3 respectively. So Henry 90.7, Dalvin Cook 89.3 versus an 83.3 and a 78.8. So the bigger improvement is you're talking a 12-point jump from Jeff Wilson to Derrick Henry in that role within the Dolphins' backfield. And even Dalvin Cook to Raheem Mostert is a 6-point jump, which is a massive jump. It's a significant upgrade. And I like Raheem Mostert and I like Jeff Wilson. And I understand the positional value debate that happens. But as far as the production that these guys have had, Derrick Henry's been one of the most utilized workload backs in all of football the last couple of years as a player who runs all different kinds of schemes. He's led the NFL in carries 3 of the last 4 seasons. He was on pace for over 400 carries, in 2021. He missed the last half of the season with injury. 321, 397, 237 in 8 games, and 382 are the touches from scrimmage from Derrick Henry. He's been over 1,000 yards all 4 seasons, including the year he only played 8 games, and he's been over 1,700 yards in 3 of the last 4 seasons, and he's been over 10 touchdowns in all 4 of those seasons as well. Monster production. Meanwhile, Dalvin Cook is no slouch from a workload perspective. Last 4 seasons, 303, 356, 283, and 303 touches. He's been over 1,350 yards from scrimmage all 4 seasons, and he's been over 10 touchdowns in 3 of the last 4 years. Right? So the production speaks for itself. Understanding that they would fill different kinds of roles, I think that's where this thing gets really interesting. I think these are both elite vision runners at this stage in their careers. They see things incredibly well. The feel that they have in all facets, whether that's in the passing game, in the screen game, and that's a big element I think that both of these players do that has not been something we've seen from this Dolphins offense yet. I think the screen game is a big area of improvement for the Dolphins this offseason. Having players like this who can be big mismatch types, I think can really help take that to the next level as compared to just some of the RPO stuff to have play action passing with screen game built into it. They're both highly explosive. They both have excellent ball security. I think what separates Derrick Henry is the back half of the traits, because all of the instinctual stuff, the ball security, the vision, the versatility, the elusiveness in the open field, like they're built differently and do it differently, but they're both highly effective at it. Dalvin Cook runs with good contact balance, but at the end of the day, Derrick Henry's Derrick Henry. He's in a whole different stratosphere as far as contact balance. Footwork, I think they're both highly effective with their ability to press the line of scrimmage. Ironically enough, they're, again, very different body types, right? So Dalvin Cook is very much of the rapid foot fire, typewriter type feet, getting up in the holes and being able to cut quickly, whereas Derrick Henry is more of like these explosive, violent cuts, runs with real, I don't want to say hard feet or heavy feet, but he will pound the turf with his steps and explode out of a cut. Whereas Dalvin's a little bit more graceful and jitterbuggy as far as how he's able to scoot and bounce around. Henry in pass pro and durability perspective, Derrick Henry missed 9 games in 2021, but we went over the workload. I mean, the fact that he's shouldered 350 plus touches as often as he does is pretty crazy. Dalvin's no slouch in that capacity. He's played through this shoulder injury. He's been dealing with it for a couple years, so I would consider them both to be reliable players at this stage. The gamble, of course, that you're taking is, when does father time catch up to you? And we won't have that answer. We do know that Derrick Henry is a step closer. He's a year closer to the 30 barrier. But he's also, again, only on the 1-year deal. And I think that's where things do get really interesting. If I had to ask myself about the fit of each player, I think Derrick Henry does more to change the dynamics of this offense. I think Dalvin Cook is an upgrade in what this offense already is. But the emergence of Derrick Henry into this offense, in my mind, gives you it gives you the most conflicting decision as an opposing coach that you can possibly make. Because you're going to die with the explosiveness of Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waddle with one high safety because you're trying to load the box for Derrick Henry and stop the run. Or you're going to live in light box counts because of the explosiveness of Waddle and Hill, and you have a locomotive freight train in Derrick Henry, who is one of the most freakish running backs we've seen this millennium in the NFL. And you put that all in the same offense. And every week, they're going to have to determine what they want to stop. And the thing that has bit the Dolphins over the last couple of years in many instances has been the 4-minute offense, grind the clock, short yardage conversions, move the chains type of running. Dalvin Cook can do that, right? But that's Derrick Henry. So as I look at these two players and I say, okay, Derrick Henry is probably going to be a higher price to pay, but he's on a shorter term deal that gives me better long-term flexibility, and I can extend him if I want to. I could also very easily restructure that deal like I would have to do with Dalvin Cook anyway, but I don't have to counterbalance that with several years of additional salary that balloons salary cap, where I'm suddenly paying for Dalvin Cook when I restructure him twice and then have to cut him going into year 3, and I've got a dead cap in that year in 2025, and then I also have a Dalvin Cook dead cap year in 2026. You don't have that long-term ramifications for what would be a short-term bridge at the position with Derrick Henry. And then you add on top of that, Derrick Henry would put more stress on opposing teams and give you a brand new element that you do not have in your offense. That for me is where if I had to make the choice, I'd rather see the Dolphins move for Derrick Henry because you have more flexibility with that maneuver, knowing full well that you're probably going to have to pay more to get it done. Now here's the caveat. Here's the fine print. The pathway for Dalvin Cook to being the player that I would prefer to have is very simple. Are the Vikings going to cut him? And what we outlined with the contract situation with Dalvin Cook and the surplus at the running back position, you got Austin Eckler on the trade block. You got Joe Mixon being asked to get a trade. You've got Derrick Henry on the trade block. Dalvin Cook's on the trade block. All these other backs are in long, or at least Derrick Henry and Austin Eckler are in the last year of their contracts. Who's going to trade for the 3 for 37 contract, knowing that suddenly can become, unless you have the vast surplus of cap space to just acknowledge the salary cap space is going to be what it is. By the way, Zeke Elliott's also going to be available on the market after June 1st. Who's going to trade for that contract? And if it's not the Dolphins, then who? And if it suddenly becomes, well, the Vikings, they want the cap relief, they're going to cut Dalvin Cook and save about half of what he's owed against the cap. And he's going to go through waivers, and nobody's going to claim the waiver because if the contract wasn't a problem, a team would trade for him. But if nobody trades for him, nobody's going to claim him because then you pick up the contract as it exists. If he gets through waivers and clears waivers, the contract is null and void. And whoever signs him can sign him to a new contract on whatever terms they want. If you told me it would be you can get Dalvin Cook at a discounted rate on free agency after he's cut and not give up a draft pick, or acquire Derrick Henry and trade a pick to get it done, I'd rather have the guy for cheap or for nothing. Because yes, a 90.7 is higher than an 89.3, but not by enough for me to ignore that it might cost you 84. You might have to trade down in the draft and get an early 4 and then send an early 4 and a 2024 draft pick for Derrick Henry. So that's the game. I don't want the Dolphins to trade for Dalvin Cook because I don't think the Vikings will find a dance partner. And if they don't, and Dalvin Cook's cut, I like the Dolphins' chances. I like the Dolphins' chances a lot, given his background and where he's from. And it was such a big deal that he made his homecoming last year and scored the big game-clinching touchdown against the Dolphins. And that's the pathway for Dalvin Cook. So when I say I don't want the Dolphins to trade for Dalvin Cook, it's not because I don't want the Dolphins to have Dalvin Cook. It's because I don't think the Vikings can move Dalvin Cook. And I'd call their bluff. And if somebody else wants to trade for that contract, I'd tip my cap to you, and then I'd call up Tennessee. I'd say, hey, what's the current price on Derrick Henry? And I'd go from there. And I wouldn't lose a wink of sleep over it, because I know at the end of the day, Henry's the guy that I think would be the more dramatic change to what the Dolphins offense can be anyway. That's going to do it for this episode of Locked On Dolphins. It's your team every day here on the Locked On Network. Appreciate all you guys who checked out the show. Shout out to the everydayers, because it is your team every day here on the Locked On Network. You can find us on YouTube, wherever you listen to your favorite podcast. So hit subscribe on the show. Follow along. Your team every day. Fins up. Make it a great rest of your day. We'll be back again soon to talk about some more prospects ahead of the 2023 NFL Draft. Peace.